is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong. Boston Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
The President of the United States is dead.
The shot heard around the world is still echoing almost 30 years later, echoing in a million questions that still have no answers. Among them, who really killed President Kennedy? Was there more than one gunman? And was it a conspiracy? But there is one other question, a shocking question, the answer to which may hold the key to the greatest mystery of the 20th century. It is shocking because it's based on one fact that nobody disputes. Somebody stole the president's brain.
Well, we requested the brain, and it was not present. What do you mean? It was gone. It disappeared.
If I'm correct, it was a conspiracy to obstruct justice because the evidence was altered.
Tonight, in the first part of a chilling current affairs special, we tackle the one question nobody dares to ask.
There was a conspiracy in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy in which a group of people secretly altered the body of the president after the shooting to make it appear in the evidence that this was a case in which a man in a building shot a man in a car.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maury Povich, and welcome to A Current Affair. Tonight, we have a special edition, the Kennedy assassination, like we've never seen it reported before. Questions never before asked, one more startling than any other. It's not just another conspiracy theory or another probe into who fired the shot that killed the president. The answer to that question, we ask tonight, could be the key to all those other mysteries. We'll have that shocking story when we come back.
If the body of the president was altered before the autopsy begins, then the body itself is impeached as the best evidence. It no longer is the best evidence.
For more than 30 years, experts, authors, reporters, government committees have argued over the Kennedy assassination mystery, each with a different theory, none with any answers. But there is one astounding fact none of those who really know will argue about. Some of the people present at the president's autopsy agree. His brain was missing when his body arrived at Bethesda Naval Hospital. We don't even have to ask the questions this riddle poses, because Raphael Abramovich confronted the forensic pathologist who made the shocking discovery.
I know a man in New York who extracts secrets from the dead. He's done it in thousands of cases, from Hitler and John Belushi, from skulls and bone fragments, from the obscure victims of cruelty and horror to such controversial cases as the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the civil rights leader Martin Luther King, Jr. His name is Dr. Michael Baden, and he's a forensic pathologist, a medical detective with a worldwide reputation for solving mysteries from clues that would baffle a real-life Sherlock Holmes. I also know a man in Los Angeles who has spent the last 26 years trying to extract secrets which he claims the CIA and the FBI have conspired to keep from the world in what he insists is the cover-up of the century. His name is David S. Lifton, and he's convinced that he has evidence that proves that someone intercepted the body of President John F. Kennedy after his assassination in Dallas and before it appeared for autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital outside of Washington, D.C. And the reason for it was to surgically alter the president's wounds to hide that he had actually been shot both from the front and the back.
If the body of the president was altered before the autopsy begins, then the body itself is impeached as the best evidence. It no longer is the best evidence. That goes for x-rays of the body, that goes for photographs of the body, that goes for a visual examination of the body. Anybody who makes any record whatsoever of the body after alteration is going to be recording incorrect or falsified data. Unwittingly, let's say, but they're getting false data.
To document his charges, David Lifton relies on an FBI report which he uncovered in the course of his research on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. You discovered an FBI report, is that correct?
That's correct.
And who was that report written by?
FBI agents Siebert and O'Neill.
Siebert and O'Neill. And in that report, you discover what?
I discovered that when the body was delivered to the Bethesda autopsy room, that there had been surgery performed in the top of the head.
At the top of the head?
Yeah.
You're not referring to the tracheotomy?
Absolutely not. It states that there was it states that when the body was taken out of the casket, it was apparent that a tracheotomy had been performed, as well as surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull.
Top of the skull. To you, that was almost like a smoking gun, right?
Yes, that in fact is the closest thing to a smoking gun in the Kennedy case.
And the reasonable hypothesis in this instance is there was no surgery performed on the top of the head at Parkland Memorial Hospital, right?
Reasonable. I called the neurosurgeon. He confirmed no one touched the president's head with a knife.
Which brings me back to Dr. Michael Barton. Back in 1979, he headed up a special investigation into the Kennedy assassination at the request of a special congressional committee. It was his mission, along with 8 other experts in forensic medicine, to determine just exactly how the president was killed. In the process, he uncovered some unsettling things.
Did you get a chance to look at the brain? Well, we requested the brain, and it was not present.
What do you mean?
It was gone. It disappeared.
Disappeared from how? Where?
Well, we didn't know how it disappeared, but we know that the brain should have been there, and it was important to examine the brain because it had never been fully examined, and it was gone. All the other tissues were gone.
All tissue samples?
Yes, and only the tissue samples.
There are documents to indicate that the brain and other tissue samples marked as the president's were turned over to the National Archives in order preserved for future examination and analysis. But subsequently to that turnover, these very items vanished. What vanished then remains unaccounted for to this very day. But that isn't anywhere near as startling as the claims that David S. Lifton makes in his book, Best Evidence, a national bestseller and the Bible of conspiracy advocates everywhere. David Lifton couldn't care less what brain or tissue samples vanished from the National Archives. What concerns him much more is the evidence that he says he has developed to indicate that when the president's body arrived at Bethesda for autopsy, there was no brain in the skull. He bases his allegations on the eyewitness testimony of 2 lab technicians who had contact with the president's body when it arrived at Bethesda for autopsy. Their names are Gerald Custer, an X-ray technician, the other, a lab technician by the name of Paul O'Connor.
As I recollect, when we got the last part of the sheet off, there was just a gasp to the room, and I looked down and I said to myself, my God, there's no brain. It's all gone.
What did anybody else say? Did you hear any comments from the others?
Well, there was a lot of mumbling and talking and everything, but I wasn't even paying attention to that. I was kind of wrapped up in my own thoughts about how massive the wound was and how bad it was, and the fact that there was no brains.
Gerald Custer, an X-ray technician, also viewed the president at Bethesda.
Yeah, I put my hands right inside the skull, and I made the comment to Reed that, my God, look at the size of this hole.
So as a result of the cranium being empty, you didn't have to do the procedure to take out the brain?
No, sir. No.
Okay. Did you question the purpose of the X-rays you were taking?
Yes, I asked, I said, what's the sense of taking the X-rays if there's nothing there? He said, well, that's not for you to say. You go ahead and do them.
You know that the president's cranium was empty
Yes.
at Bethesda.
Mostly empty. I'd say 90% empty, yes.
At Dallas, it wasn't empty. There was a small egg-sized wound at the right rear of the head, about the size of an egg. 2 3/4 inches is the measurements given by the Dallas doctors in sworn testimony, and that's it, 2 3/4 inch. The wound at Bethesda is 4 times larger.
Oh, at least.
Were you aware of that before?
No, I wasn't.
Then the body that O'Connor takes out of the body bag is the body upon which the autopsy is performed, right?
Correct.
And during the course of that autopsy, 2 FBI agents are in the room. Is that correct?
Right, from beginning to end.
And their names again are?
Are FBI agents James Siebert and Francis O'Neill.
And they write the report.
They make notes and write a report that weekend.
And according to their report, one of the doctors performing or being involved in the autopsy said there's been surgical, what?
They said that it was apparent that a trach had been performed, as well as surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull.
That meant the body had to have been altered as far as you were concerned. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the...
That's the evidence.
That's the probable cause for body alteration. That's the beginning of the
Now,
story.
have you been able to track down where you think the alteration took place? Or who performed
No, I
the
do not
alteration?
know who performed the alteration, and I don't know where it took place. I just know the time frame when it must have taken place.
Now, what does that indicate to you?
That indicates to me that there was a conspiracy in connection with the assassination of President Kennedy, in which a group of people secretly altered the body of the president after the shooting in order to change the facts of the shooting to make it appear in the evidence that this was a case in which a man in a building shot a man in a car.
If you're correct, there had to have been more than one shooter.
If I'm correct, there was a conspiracy to obstruct justice because the evidence was altered. Yes, and since they obstructed it in such a way that he was shot from the front originally, you could start counting shooters. That's right. You could start saying there have to be more than one shooter. I would say there was more than one shooter, but then I don't think Oswald's gun has anything to do with the shooting if the body was altered.
But Dr. Michael Baden, who has analyzed the available autopsy data, insists that the president was shot only from the back and that no bullets entered the president from the front.
Did all of you on that committee agree that the president was struck twice from behind?
Of the 9 of us, among us, we had done more than 100,000 autopsies on gunshot wound victims and murder victims. We all agreed that the president was struck twice from behind. 8 of us agreed that there were no other shots that struck the president. One forensic pathologist, Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's an excellent forensic pathologist out of Pittsburgh, was concerned about the possibility that there was a 3rd shot that struck the president from the front and entered the exit hole on the right side, but there was no evidence of a bullet accompanying that.
Would having the brain help you to determine that?
Having the brain would have helped dispel concerns about the fact the brain was missing. I don't want to in any way justify the fact that the brain of President Kennedy was not properly dissected and evaluated. It never was. However, it was present, it was there, it was photographed, and from all the other evidence we have, there was nothing of within that brain substance that would have changed the opinion of the committee.
Dr. Biden's not addressing the issue because he is not dealing with the question of whether the body itself was altered between the time it left Texas and the time it arrived in Washington.
No, you're correct. He assumes the body was not altered.
Right.
He assumes that the x-rays that he has and the pictures that he has are of the actual body of the president as it left Dallas.
That is a fundamental flaw in his reasoning. It's a logical flaw. It's a legal flaw, really. But we're involved here in a catch-22 situation because he would say, by definition, my autopsy photographs and x-rays are the best evidence, and the only way I authenticate them is to prove they're President Kennedy. But proving they're President Kennedy does not prove they're President Kennedy as he left Dallas. That's the key.
Fascinating. But what happened in Dallas after the shooting? We'll look at the pieces of that puzzle when we return.
For various reasons, which have never fully been worked out to everybody's satisfaction, the body was illegally taken from Texas to Washington, D.C.
After President Kennedy was shot, his body was flown to Andrews Air Force Base and then driven to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. Before the autopsy was even begun, a shocking discovery was made. What was found made all the government investigations that followed actually a waste of time. Some say there was one vital piece of evidence missing. Raphael Abramovitz continues with his story of the greatest Kennedy mystery of them all.
Shortly after President Kennedy was assassinated, his successor, President Lyndon Johnson, appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission to determine how and why President Kennedy was killed. The commission was headed by then Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Earl Warren, a man considered as trustworthy as the truth itself. After 9 months of intensive investigation and volumes of sworn testimony, the Warren Commission issued its report. And in that report, the commission stated categorically that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone had shot and killed the President of the United States. That the President's body, considered to be the best evidence, had proven conclusively that both bullets had entered from the rear and the rear only. But long before the Warren Commission report and its 26 volumes of documentation came off the government presses, conspiracy theories were rampant and gaining widespread support.
The evidence in the 26 volumes indicated many witnesses thought the shots came from the front, and when the president was brought to Parkland Hospital, the doctors there thought, based on what they saw on the body, that he was shot from the front.
The president's body was seized by the Secret Service from the emergency room at Parkland Hospital in Dallas and rushed to the airport, where it was placed on board Air Force One for immediate transit to Washington, D.C.
For various reasons, which have never fully been worked out to everybody's satisfaction, the body was illegally taken from Texas to Washington, D.C. Reasons given have included they didn't know how wide the conspiracy was. Maybe the new President Johnson was going to be at risk. Maybe Mrs. Kennedy would have been at risk from other shooters. Mrs. Kennedy wouldn't leave unless her husband came. And they made a judgment to remove the body over the very overt objection of the coroner there, who's an excellent forensic pathologist.
Under normal circumstances, the body of the deceased is the best evidence to determine the cause of death. And the way to do that is to conduct a thorough autopsy. But in the case of the assassinated president, nothing of the sort occurred.
The body was removed to Bethesda, where an autopsy was done by somebody who had never done a gunshot wound autopsy before, or as far as I know, since. That was...
Wait a second. The president's body is brought to Bethesda, and the man in charge of the autopsy had never done a bullet murder before?
That's correct.
You mean there was nobody present who had any familiarity with gunshot wounds to handle the autopsy of the President of the United States?
The simple answer is yes, there was nobody present at that autopsy who knew the difference or could professionally distinguish between entrance wounds and exit wounds, or properly do a medical exam or autopsy.
Back in the emergency room in Dallas, the doctors, in a desperate attempt to save the president's life, had made an incision in the throat area for the insertion of a breathing tube. That incision was made in the very location where a bullet had passed through.
In Bethesda, the doctors look at President Kennedy, they see the tracheostomy in the neck and don't appreciate there's a bullet wound there. They turn the body over and see a bullet wound in the back. The people at Dallas had not turned the body over and didn't see the wound in the back. So the people in doing the autopsy see one entrance wound in the back, no exit wound, and they talk among themselves, and the people writing from the Secret Service and the FBI have it documented, that they said, well, the bullet must have gone in and then dropped out through the same hole.
But that isn't all. According to Dr. Baden, the Navy doctors in charge of the autopsy failed to properly locate the fatal entry wound in the back of the president's head. How did Commander Humes miss the entry wound in the back of the president's head, the second bullet?
Well, it's not that he missed it. He misinterpreted where it was.
How could he misinterpret it by 4 or more inches?
By 4 inches. As best as I could determine from going over all the evidence, he mistook a fragment of brain tissue that was adherent to the hair low down in the back of the head with a bullet perforation, where the bullet perforation really was 4 inches above it. And
I mean, he didn't touch the head of the president, move it around, take a look at it? You would have just left...
Whoa.
You would have just left the head lying where it was while you did the autopsy when the wound is from the back?
Well, part of the problem in the evaluation of the entrance wound in the head is the only way one can properly examine, define, and interpret a gunshot wound of a hairy area of the head is to shave the hair away.
And they didn't do that.
The hair was not shaved away in Dallas when they were treating the president because he was terminal. And when the autopsy was done, the autopsy itself, which lasted less than 2 or 3 hours, because there was great concern to get things done as quickly as possible, the hair was not shaved either. Estimates were made as to the length of the injury in the side of the head. The people in Dallas, as I recall, estimated to be about 2 inches. The people in who did the autopsy, Dr. Humes, about 3 inches. And because of that, this fueled conspiracy theories that therefore there had to be some kind of tampering with the evidence. That is, before that person gets from, the president gets from Dallas up to Bethesda, somebody did some surgical incision that enlarged the perforation. This is
to hide a frontal entrance.
To remove a bullet, to hide an entrance, to somehow obscure what really happened.
We'll have more when we come back. Our special on the greatest Kennedy mystery of them all continues.
What happened to JFK's body after it was put on Air Force One?
Something happened between 2:14 and 2:47 when the plane takes off. And here is evidence that the body was indeed surgically changed.
The notes were destroyed.
The unspeakable missing evidence. Day 2, 33 minutes in Dallas.
We will have more of this fascinating story tomorrow. And that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a happy Labor Day, what's left of it. Until next time, America. On Air Force One, Lyndon Johnson is sworn in as President Kennedy's grieving widow, Jackie, stands at his side. And all the president's men were there, too. So who was guarding JFK's body? And what else happened in those 33 minutes? Some say a lot happened, as Raphael Abramovich reports.
The assassinated president's body was placed on board Air Force One at 2:14 p.m. Dallas time on November 22nd, 1963. But before the plane took off for Washington, D.C., the flight was delayed for 33 minutes so that Lyndon Johnson could be sworn in as President of the United States. Present at the ceremony is Jackie Kennedy. The 33 minutes are critical to David Lifton's conspiracy theory.
At some point, you're saying after the body
Is put aboard
is
at
put aboard,
2:14.
it is removed from its original coffin
That's
or
correct.
casket?
That's correct. That takes place during the general business of the flight being delayed because Lyndon Johnson tells the others that Bobby Kennedy has told him he should be sworn in Dallas before takeoff, therefore we must delay the flight. Bobby Kennedy denies giving Johnson any such advice or instruction. He says he couldn't understand why Johnson couldn't wait for a swearing in until he returned to Washington. And so the 4 or 5 Kennedy people in the tail compartment are called to the front of the plane. That's the period during which the coffin is essentially unattended by the loyalists, if you want to call them, people who had a personal devotion and love to President Kennedy. Because when that plane took off down the runway at 2:47, if the witnesses at the other end of the line are correct, that coffin has to be empty.
David Lifton draws his conspiracy conclusions from FBI files, from the Warren Commission report and his 26 volumes of documentation, and from personal interviews which he conducted with eyewitnesses. Here's what his research video on the Kennedy assassination reveals.
And here is evidence that the body was indeed surgically changed. This is the FBI report written by the 2 agents who actually attended the autopsy. James Siebert and Francis O'Neill wrote that when the body was removed from the casket, it was, quote, apparent that a tracheotomy had been performed, as well as surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull. In fact, no surgery of the head was performed in Dallas, only a tracheotomy. So if this FBI report is correct, someone must have had access to the body before it reached Bethesda, and my witnesses indicate someone did. I've traced the journey of the body, beginning with Aubrey Reich. That afternoon, he worked for the O'Neill Funeral Home in Dallas. Now he's a sergeant with the Highland Park, Texas Police.
I helped put President Kennedy's body in a bronze ceremonial casket on November 22nd, 1963, at Parkland Memorial Hospital.
In Bethesda, Paul O'Connor was a medical technician who assisted the autopsy doctors. Today, he's a retired police officer and lives in Gainesville, Florida. When President Kennedy's body was brought to the morgue, what kind of casket was it in?
It was a typical, what I call a typical pinkish gray shipping casket. The type of casket that they usually ship bodies from one part of the country to the other. It was just a plain casket, I'd say cheap casket.
Dennis David, who was there when the ambulance came in.
As I recall, it was a black unmarked ambulance. And we offloaded a casket, and it was carried into the autopsy room. This casket is a plain gray box, if you will, metal box. Anybody who's ever been in Vietnam would know what I'm talking about. We shipped hundreds of bodies out of there in the same type of casket. It's just a plain shipping casket.
In the picture here, you can tell this is not a shipping casket. A shipping casket would be what they'd ship a body back from, say, Vietnam in. This couldn't be a shipping casket. This is a high-class casket here.
Paul O'Connor describes the scene at Bethesda.
We opened the whole casket up, and there was a gray body bag, zipped shut. We unzipped the body bag, and the president's body was lifted out of the body bag. He's completely naked except for a sheet wrapped around his head, a bloody sheet.
Now, when you put the president's body into the coffin, did you put the president's body into a body bag?
No, sir.
After you begin your investigation, you come across witnesses who indicate to you that 2 caskets were delivered to Bethesda. Is that correct?
That's correct.
1 casket is delivered to some rear entrance.
Yes, the casket containing the body, the shipping casket, was delivered.
The shipping casket is delivered
to the rear loading dock.
To the rear loading dock and is then transferred into the autopsy
That's
room.
correct.
Someone opens that casket?
That's correct. And
who opens the casket?
Among others, Paul O'Connor.
And when he opens the casket, he finds what?
He finds a body bag.
And inside the body bag
He
is
opens
what?
the body bag. Inside is President Kennedy's body.
And it is this body upon which the autopsy is performed. Is that correct?
Yes.
At some other point in time that same evening, people say that a casket, another casket, arrives at the front entrance of the
everybody sees that. That's the one that's witnessed by the hundreds of people at the front. That's the casket we all see leaving Andrews Air Force Base.
Now, how is it explained that 2 caskets arrived there that day?
No one explains it. No one knew about this until Best Evidence was published in 1981. And the most blatant evidence that someone changed the body is that it left Dallas with a small wound in the back of the head about the size of an egg and arrived at Bethesda with a wound 4 times as large. It left Dallas with a brain, and the Bethesda autopsy reports on a brain presumably removed from the president's cranium. Yet 2 of my witnesses say that when the body arrived, the cranium was empty.
When we got the last part of the sheet off, there was just a gasp to the room, and I looked down and I said to myself, my God, there's no brain. It's all gone.
I put my hands right inside the skull, and I made the comment to Reed that, my God, look at the size of this hole.
I showed David Lifton's video to Dr. Baden to get his reaction. Dr. Baden has written extensively on the Kennedy assassination, having conducted an investigation into the matter at the request of a congressional subcommittee. In his recent book, Unnatural Death, Confessions of a Medical Examiner, he summarizes his own findings.
President Kennedy died of 2 bullet wounds, and only 2 that struck his body from behind, that 1 went through the brain, and that there was no tampering with the body during transportation from Texas to Washington.
Unlike David Lifton, Dr. Baden doesn't have a video that summarizes his findings, but he does have a set of slides. One of those slides is of the cover sheet of the autopsy report on President Kennedy. When it flashed on the screen, I noticed that the space reserved for indicating brain weight was blank. Dr. Baden was surprised by the discovery.
Now, I noticed that there are indications of the weights of various organs, right? There's the right lung, 320 grams, what is it?
Yes, 320 grams,
and then the left
lung,
left lung is 290.
Yeah, those are normal weights.
Normal weights. Now, I noticed there's the brain there, and there's nothing for the brain. There's something for the spleen, there's something for the kidney, there's something for the right kidney, there's something for the liver, nothing for the brain.
That's correct. That's a very good observation on your part. I think that since there are various issues about the brain that have come up, the absence of a brain weight could assume more significance.
Well, it certainly assumes great significance for Mr. Lifton, right?
Well, it would for Mr. Lifton, I'm sure, but in the normal course, and when a brain is removed that's damaged, often the brain is immediately put into formaldehyde and is weighed afterwards. So that the absence of the brain weight...
What do you do normally?
Normally, I would weigh it.
You would weigh it. You take out the brain, right? You would weigh it, and you'd make a notation right where it says brain, right?
That's correct.
We don't have it here. It is blank, right?
That's correct.
This is an autopsy that if you graded it, you'd give it what kind of grade?
A failing grade.
A failing grade.
For a medical legal autopsy.
For a forensic autopsy.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Baden isn't the only one surprised by the absence of an entry for brain weight, a routine procedure at autopsy. David Lifton was amazed by this discovery as well when I told him about it. I know that because he later faxed me a letter congratulating me on something he and his researchers should have discovered but had missed. And after all of this, is there anything else that's worth saying? Yes, there is. Because here facts written in blood appear to have been forever obscured by ignorance, incompetence, and hasty ink. And maybe, just maybe, by the unthinkable, that a president of the United States was the victim of a conspiracy that has escaped justice.
And after nearly 30 years, we still don't have the definitive answer. We'll be back in a moment. Now, coming up on our next current affair, a special from the battlefront. The story Iraq tried to stop, the tell-all war diary of our man in Baghdad, David Lee Miller, the untold story from inside Iraq to hell and back. Some people might call him a nerd, a bean counter, an accountant, but he's in the middle of an election and an unlikely sex scandal with this woman, and he's not going to take it anymore. Revenge of the nerd. We'll have those stories for you tomorrow. And that's it for a current affair tonight. But as we leave you, let's have some of the memories of 1963. And a man none of us will ever forget. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, America.